Welcome, Space Watchers, to this special episode of Space for Good. So you know that usually we have long interviews dissecting a problem in depth, and we usually focus more on a long journey. But today we are dedicating a very special episode to wildfires affecting the LA area. So we are here with Henning, the solution owner from OroraTech, to better understand what is going on in LA, and most importantly, what and how space technology can help. So Sean has over 15 years of experience in wildfire management and natural resources management, having worked with the U.S. Forest Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildfire Service. And as a member of the Prescott Hotshots, which is one of about 100 elite fire crews in the U.S., he has witnessed some of the largest and most challenging wildfires in the U.S., gaining first-hand insight on how fires can actually profoundly impact nature and the communities. Sean, you are the right man at the right time. Welcome to Space for Good. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you here. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me here.
My pleasure, and also a personal thanks to the entire OroraTech team that allow me to borrow you for a few minutes just to try to understand what is going on here. So my first question for you is obviously what is happening in LA right now? We just heard terrible news from the other side of the world. Can you help us to understand?
Yeah, so I think we've all been reading a lot of the headlines where they've just experienced that rash of very large and extreme wildfires, including that Palisades fire and the Eaton fire, not just resulting in loss of life, but extensive property damage, as well as several issues with mass evacuations. I've been reading recently that there's as many as 12,000 firefighting personnel on these fires, which I think is just crazy. That's a lot of fire personnel. And even international help from Canada and Mexico, which I think is just incredible.
So from your, carry on, sorry.
Well, yeah, what really stood out to me as I was reading about this fire was, I guess, when you're taught a lot of fire response. So while I was on that hotshot crew, we talk a lot about the fire triangle. And the main drivers of fire and fire behavior, fire spread, are fuels, weather, and topography. And so fuels referring to not just the grasses, the shrubs, the trees, that vegetation that's flammable, but even in instances like this, just the communities being densely populated, being built of flammable materials can become the fuels themselves. In Southern California, it sounded like they had those Santa Ana winds, which bring the high winds influencing that weather dynamic. They've also been experiencing prolonged drought, which has led to that low moisture content in vegetation and the soil, and even just in the atmosphere. So that vegetation being that fuel kind of acts like a sponge now, the atmosphere and the soil, making it even more dry. So very susceptible to not just new starts, but even something as small as a single spark could now start a fire where maybe it wouldn't have several months ago. And then just that area of Los Angeles, it has a lot of slopes. So things like hills, the mountains, the canyons, especially some of those canyons and drainages, you know, that can act kind of like a nozzle or a wind tunnel and even accelerate some of those winds. And that's what really stood out to me, I guess, as I was reading some of these articles, was they were talking about winds as high as 100 kilometers per hour. So when you're talking about dropping water or retardant from aircraft, sometimes that wind can be so fast it doesn't even reach the ground. It just dissipates with the wind. And even at wind speeds, half of that is sometimes when even the pilots are talking about, is it safe to fly? So it's even possible they weren't able to fly. So it's just kind of all three of those things, the fuels, weather, topography, all aligned to make those problems just that perfect condition for a large fire.
Wow. So have you noticed an increase in fires over the recent years? Because obviously there is a lot of talk about the connection between climate change and fires, but I want to get a bit more scientific here. I don't want to be anecdotal. So what's your impression as an expert?
Yeah, my impression is that there's been an increase in both fires and just acres burned. And I think part of what's driving even just a more noticeable fire is the spread into the wildland-urban urban interface, or the WUI, as some people will call it. You know, I've read some articles that say just the propagation of urban land is, you know, increased, I think, about 35% since the year 2000. So there's a lot more people living next to the forest, living next to grasses, living next to shrublands. And so those ignitions are now a lot more likely to impact people's homes.
And how can space technologies, I mean, let's take a bit of a step back and let's speak about our field. How can space technologies help in such situations?
Yeah, so when I was working previously as a fire behavior analyst, satellite data is critical. So there's kind of several components we can look at. So both through early detection, through monitoring of the fire, resource coordination, as well as just informing some of the fuel models that we might run to inform just pre-season reviews, as well as current fire spread to help inform response and evacuations. So with like early detection, satellites, can have thermal imaging sensors. They're constantly in orbit doing multiple overpasses a day through various platforms. They operate 24/7, 365. So we're able to constantly track how much heat is out there on the globe. With monitoring fire behavior, again, with multiple overpasses, sometimes where there's not an aircraft or a fire lookout tower in place to visibly see the fire, you can supplement that with some satellite observations. And then additionally, they can just help feed some of those initial fire perimeters. So from early detection to maybe as resources are en route to a fire, you can see specifically where that fire is on a landscape, see what kind of fuels it's burning in, see if it's on, one side of a road or one side of a river or other fire break. And that can help inform and pre-plan, their responders as they're en route and be more prepared for when they arrive on scene.
So monitoring, but also managing and modeling in a sort of way, because it's when I suppose when you're there, you actually need live information, real-time information, understanding where the fire is moving, correct? The direction of the fire.
Yeah, and then even you can help use the satellite observations to supplement, kind of that disturbance, so you can see things like wildfires or tornadoes or any other natural disturbance that might occur in a forest and cause a vegetation or fuels change. And sometimes those models are used in like pre-season reviews to help determine where you're most likely to have issues on your landscape should you get a fire. And that can help even kind of pre-plan and get people thinking about what would we do if this happened so that they're more ready when it does happen.
So you moved from the US Forest Service to OroraTech, which is a private company. And is a space private company. So how can a space private company like OroraTech involved in wildfires support all the key problems that you just evidenced? How does OroraTech support the management of these extreme events?
Yeah, so pretty much everything I just said. But yeah, with early fire detection, so we have our own proprietary thermal sensors that help supplement existing sensors in space so that we can help identify fires as soon as they start, especially in areas that are difficult to monitor, that maybe don't have existing infrastructure such as cameras or staff lookout towers. I think they're especially helpful in steep topography. Having lived in Arizona previously, so that can be super helpful when looking down in some of the canyons you wouldn't otherwise be able to see into. We also provide fire spread modeling. So we can take that initial detection and very quickly we can show you a spread model that can show where the fire might reach up to 24 hours out. That can be performed very quickly, just in a matter of minutes, either through automated or custom inputs of weather, topography, and vegetation models. And we've shown that to be much faster than other competitors out there, which I think is really critical when it's time to inform not just the response, but also evacuations for any infrastructure or communities threatened. I think a big thing we also help with is just that real-time monitoring. There can oftentimes be a gap between the field responders, so the people that are there on scene, and some of the decision makers that are maybe still in the office. And so being able to show a common screen of where the fire is, how fast it's spread, can really help keep that whole response between the decision makers, between the people on scene, stay on that same page. And so knowing that everyone's working off the same common information. Additionally, I think a really powerful thing we offer is the damage analysis, where we can provide kind of that fire severity, fire intensity post-fire. That can be really critical, especially in markets like Southern California. They will experience things like mudslides or floods, often in that sloped terrain after an extreme wildfire event. And so providing land managers with that burned area analysis can help them get in and mitigate some of those so that hopefully they're not faced with a full cycle of not just having the fires, but now floods and mudslides afterwards, but that full cycle of mitigation. And then additionally, just that we track, all of this, again, 24/7, 365. There's no seasonal staffing. They're always up there in providing data that hopefully provides managers with actionable intelligence.
Crazy. It takes such a big team, isn't it? Because there is the part of the team that are the engineers that care about the satellites, and then there is the intelligence for the algorithm, and then there are people like you that are like wildfire experts that actually, I suppose, help to train the algorithm or to find all the right solution for the problems for the end users, which in the end are the firefighters, for example. Am I understanding correctly how it works, this synergy between the fire community and the satellite community?
Yeah, and that's where I really try to specialize myself, is just having that field experience myself. I try to make sure what a lot of this technology offers is valuable for the people that are using it to make time-critical decisions.
Of course. So we spoke about managing in a moment of extreme danger of risk. Let's do a step back. How about preventing? Is there something the space can do to prevent fires? Can we step into the kind of area where we actually try to do something for the community to avoid the fires to happen? Or is something so natural that we just cannot help it?
Oh, we can definitely help. And I think space technologies are very helpful in that. I talked a little bit before about kind of the pre-season modeling that can be done. And so it's possible to look at your landscape where you've historically had fires, where maybe you've done even vegetation treatments, whether that be things like mechanical thinning or prescribed fire, or even just look at where communities have spread to, different roads. The landscape is constantly changing. And I think it's really incredible to use satellite imagery to see how things change over time. So having that data set that's constantly changing with us, we're able to see and identify maybe areas where vegetation is thick, where it could be very dry. So implement things like vegetation treatment or prescribed fire ahead of large fire events. That can also be given to things like city managers or other people that are in just developing communities or developing infrastructure, and inform them of where their infrastructure is at less risk. And then additionally, that can even just be used to help bolster things like evacuation routes. So look at some of the existing infrastructure, talk about how many people are up a road. Can that road handle it? If people needed to get out, is it enough? Or do we need to maybe look at future planning and provide additional roads or different time critical situations that could apply?
Very interesting. So preventing the damages that the fire can do to human settlements. And my thinking now goes to all my former colleagues at JPL or at Caltech. Some of them, they lost their houses, they've been displaced. So I really hope that they can go soon back to the houses. Having your house and your memory and your history deleted and erased because of a fire is a terrible experience. So yeah. Sean, thank you so much for being here with us today. It was very insightful, very important. This is the moment when we see how we can be at service for the global community. Thank you very much for explaining how it works. And I really hope this situation is going to get resolved soon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope so as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I will see you in the next episode of Space for Good. Thank you very much.